All right, today we're jumping into the story of a man who pretty much turned the world of missionary work on its head back in the 19th century. His name was Hudson Taylor, and his entire life was this high-stakes experiment in what you might call radical faith. Let's dig into how he did it.
So this quote right here, this is basically the operating system for his entire life. I mean, just think about that for a second. We live in a world that runs on fundraising, on planning, on getting your resources lined up before you do anything. Taylor just flipped that script. He said, nope, you do the work God's way and the resources will just show up. It's a totally counterintuitive way to live.
So that's really the big question for us today. Who was this man who would bet his entire life on a principle like that? And what was the enormous challenge he was facing that seemed to demand such an extreme, all-in solution?
To really get Taylor's radical method, you have to go back to the very beginning, to this fire that was lit in his soul for one very specific place on the map.
Here's the quick rundown. He was born in England in 1832. As a teenager, he has this really profound Christian conversion experience, and that's it. His life's direction is basically set. And it wasn't just a vague calling, it was laser-focused on the unreached people deep inside China.
And this was no small thing. You have to try and picture it. For a Westerner in the 19th century, China was this massive, unknown, and almost completely inaccessible world. Most missionary work just kind of hugged the coastal cities, but that vast interior, where hundreds of millions of people lived, it was effectively off-limits.
So when he's confronted with this seemingly impossible problem, Taylor doesn't just decide to try harder. No, he throws out the entire playbook and comes up with a completely radical new way of doing things.
And when I say his approach was revolutionary, I mean it on every single level. So the traditional way was to stay on the coast. He pushed deep inland. The old way was to maintain your Western customs. He adapted to them, adopting Chinese dress, even growing a pigtail to remove those cultural barriers. And here's the most radical part. He refused to fundraise. He relied completely on prayer for every single need. The principle was simple. You don't ask people for money, you ask God.
Now, this wasn't just his own personal philosophy. He built an entire organization around it. The China Inland Mission was the engine for his vision. It was this faith-based mission designed specifically to send hundreds of ordinary men and women, not just ordained ministers, right into the very heart of China.
Of course, this did not come without some serious pushback. The established missionary world at the time, they called him extreme, even reckless. But for Taylor, this wasn't about being extreme just for the sake of it. He was driven by this deep spiritual belief that to truly reach people with a message of new life, you first had to die to your own life, your own comfort, your own culture, your own way of doing things.
So, what was the engine that powered this radical life? Well, it all boils down to this one core idea of dying to self. And for Hudson Taylor, this wasn't a metaphor. It was his daily operating principle.
At the very heart of his philosophy is this single, powerful metaphor from the Bible. A seed of wheat, it can't produce a harvest unless it first falls into the ground and dies. Taylor took that idea and applied it directly and very literally to his own life.
So what did that actually look like? It meant trading the comforts of England for the hardships of inland China. It meant sacrificing his reputation among his peers back home. It meant surrendering everything that was familiar, all so that his message could have a chance to take root and live. This wasn't just some abstract belief. It was a daily, costly reality.
This right here, this quote clarifies his entire mindset. For Taylor, success wasn't going to come from him trying harder to be faithful. It came from trusting in a God who was faithful. He saw his role not as producing results, but simply being an open channel for them to happen. So, what was the result of this radical, all-in approach? What was the harvest that came from this life that was planted in faith? Well, that brings us to his lasting legacy.
His life really offers a kind of blueprint for this type of faith, and you can boil it down to the three principles you see here. It's a cycle, right? You follow the call into the unknown, you trust that the supply will be there when you need it, and you commit everything you have to the cause.
And his life was absolutely filled with hardship. We're talking constant sickness, the crushing personal loss of his wife and some of his children, and just deep poverty. And yet through all of that seed that fell into the ground and died, it brought forth an incredible harvest. The work that he started continues to bear fruit even now, over a century later.
This final thought from Taylor just perfectly captures his entire philosophy. For him, there was no middle ground. There were no half measures. It was all or nothing. And that kind of leaves us with a challenging question, doesn't it? What does that kind of total commitment look like in any area of life, and what could it possibly accomplish?